This is Sales Management Mastery, episode 29.
Welcome to Sales Management Mastery, where you get an insider's look on how to build, motivate, coach, and lead a high-performance, low-maintenance sales team. Here's your host, Ralph Burns.
Hello and welcome to Sales Management Mastery online at salesmanagementmastery.com. And we're here to help you and your sales managers build a team of highly motivated elite salespeople using easy-to-use real-world sales management techniques, strategies, and tactics that'll unleash a flood of new sales for your sales organization. On this episode of Sales Management Mastery, we teach you how to motivate your salespeople with stories. I'd like to remind you that if you'd like to get a jump start on creating your own team of supercharged salespeople using our proven system, you can claim your free training course of your choice, including our most popular training of all time, How to Motivate Your Sales Team to Peak Performance at the Sales Management Mastery Academy, by going to salestraininggift.com. Now, one of the things that my kids ask me every single night before they go to bed, and sometimes I do it depending on time and sometimes I don't, is to tell them a bedtime story. And I think all of us enjoy a good story. I think it starts from very early on, and I think the reason is that if you sort of trace this back to the caveman days and how history and how learning was sort of passed on from one person to another, it all started with the campfire story and stories being told in lieu of books or anything that was written down, stories being told from one person to the next and was handed down from generation to generation. So genetically, I think we're wired to enjoy storytelling as not only a way to, in the case of my kids, provide enjoyment, but also to learn. And in those stories that I tell them at night, I oftentimes have some kind of tie-in for something about achievement or learning or being a good person, some sort of moral to that story, although it gets very difficult after having done it now for about 10 years. But nonetheless, they love stories. And it's the same thing with your salespeople. Your salespeople learn and can be motivated extremely effectively through storytelling. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today on this week's show. Now, if you're a sales manager who loves every part of your job except maybe one particular part, which is speaking in front of groups, then this is definitely a show for you. Not only are stories going to be very effective in your one-on-one conversations, but they're also going to be very effective in any of those group presentations that you need to do on occasion for sales meetings, regional sales meetings, maybe a weekly sales meeting that you have in front of your group, or even on conference calls and teleseminars and those sorts of things. But as a sales manager, you definitely do need to master the art of public speaking. And the easiest and best way to do that is to integrate storytelling into that public speaking so that you can not only motivate your troops, but also keep them engaged and teach them a lesson sort of at the same time using this method that we just talked about. So maybe each month you have a sales meeting, you take up the podium and you've got the usual roundup of sales stats, graphs, pie charts, and as you're going through them, the salespeople in the audience, they start to fidget, and you kind of notice that you're losing them a little bit. Their eyes are starting to glaze over, and even though you haven't finished your entire presentation, you know that you've lost the audience. And the reason is that charts and figures are often keys to a lot of business presentations and sales presentations. But stories about those charts and graphs really help sell your message far more effectively. And like we said before, people remember stories much longer than they ever remember graphs and charts because they can relate to it. A story lowers an individual's defenses, so to speak. You're sort of naturally hardwired, like we said before, from way back in the days of the caveman and how history and human history was passed on before the written word, before stories were actually written down into books and manuscripts. Stories were passed along by word of mouth. And that's how people learned. So stories not only boost retention levels, but they also help ensure that your particular sales message has a certain amount of legs. So if you want people to talk about your product or your ideas, in this particular case as a sales manager, they are far more likely to find a story about it more interesting and engaging and rememberable, if that's a word, than just a straight pie chart or a graph. So today we're going to give you 12 quick tips on how to use storytelling as an effective part of not only your speeches, but your one-on-one interactions that you have with your salespeople. Number one is to be natural, and don't recite a story word for word. The audience usually will know if it's memorized, so sort of tell it casually, and that's the best way that people can relate to it. If they know that you're trying to memorize it and you're trying to stumble for your words, they'll figure that out very quickly and your message will be lost. So approach storytelling as though you're speaking to people in their living rooms, and even get a little bit closer to them than you normally would. Get from out behind that podium. Make an interaction or a personal connection with them, and that's usually in the United States about 4 to 5 feet away from them. Walk around the room, those sorts of things. Number two is to keep it lean, and don't turn a story into a novel. Stick to the basics, the who, what, when, where. If you go into a story that lasts 15 minutes, you're going to lose people. So keep it under a minute or two, and that's the best way to make it effective. So you might want to ask yourself if there's anything in the story as you're preparing for this speech that you don't need, and just pull that part out. Number three is know what you're trying to accomplish. And telling a story for its own sake doesn't improve a speech. And I think a lot of people start off speeches with a joke or something not related to the subject. Have it tie back into your message. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of that, sort of sprinkled through the rest of the tips here. Number four is tie the story to the point being made. And for example of this, and here I am telling a story, is an example that I once used is that when I was selling some diagnostics, our selling team, all they really did every single day is figure out the tiny little glitches or the little weaknesses in the competition. And I related a story of the storming of Normandy Beach in World War II to small packs of 4 or 5 or 6 men with non-commissioned officers that found small weaknesses in the German defense lines, and they picked out those tiny little weaknesses and then exploited them in order to win that entire battle. And I related that back to what we do on a daily basis with our competition. So if you're going to tell a story about the Normandy landings of D-Day in World War II, relate it back to something specific and something that you're trying to reinforce to your group. And in this case, it was how important it is for us to really know our competition, everything about them, their strong points as well as their tiny little weaknesses, and then exploit those weaknesses just like the Allies did on D-Day back in 1944. Number 5 is don't overdo it. Limit the number of stories to 2 or 3. If you start telling a story on every single point, people are just going to lose you. And I've been guilty of this. I've done presentations where I've had 7 or 8 different points I wanted to get through, and I told a story on each one. And I think even though the stories didn't last too long, that was probably too much. So if you have 7 or 8 points, maybe tell stories for 3 of them, or maybe cite examples for the other 2, but still stories for maybe 3 out of the 7 or 8. Number 6 is balance failure with success. In motivational speeches, if you're trying to motivate your salespeople, one of the best ways to really get to them and connect with them is underscore your failures, or the failures. It's not always bright and shiny, and it's not always blue skies. There are times when they're going to fail. And if you're like a lot of the salespeople that I've managed in the past that do cold calling, for example, they might make 100 calls to get 10 appointments for 1 sale. So that means 99 times out of 100, they're really failing, but they're getting to that 1 sale. So don't talk things about how successful you always were. You can always talk about your failures as well. It makes you much more transparent, builds trust, and helps motivate them as well. Number 7 is don't fabricate, don't make anything up. So if your audience thinks that you've made up the story, then you'll lose credibility. So you can certainly cite an example of somebody else and tell a story of that other person, but if you say that it was you and it really was someone else, they'll figure that out fairly quickly. Salespeople are very adept, remember, at picking up nonverbal clues, and if you're telling a lie or telling something that's fabricated, they pick that up on that very quickly. Number 8 is don't be obvious. During the setup, make sure that it's not immediately evident where that story is going to go. If you kind of give it away too early, you reduce that suspense. So make sure that when you start your story, you don't give away the ending so that there is a certain amount of suspense. And if you can keep them engaged all the while and have them not really know where you're going with it, then that is a little bit more effective and it keeps them engaged during the entire story and the entire speech. Number 9 is collect your material. Build a file of great stories along the way. And this is what I would always do. I was always sort of find something maybe in a magazine or whatever. I'd rip it out and then I'd throw it in a swipe file. And I might use it as a story or a small anecdote in some speech that I might have coming up or some sales meeting in order to motivate the troops. So create a swipe file of sorts as you're just reading the newspaper. Maybe you read about somebody who has done great things locally or anything like that, any great historical figure. You can use those and sprinkle those in as stories as well. Just like I did with the World War II story, that was really sort of a story of the landings and the beaches of Normandy on D-Day in World War II. So number 10 is maintain eye contact. Extremely important. And if you don't connect with people visually, their attention wanders. And a really good way to do this is to make sure that you know your material, obviously, but you can wander around and get into their personal space and look at them 4 or 5 feet away. Now, depending on where you are, that personal space is a little bit different. If you're in Europe or if you're in Asia, you're listening to this, that might be slightly different. But in the United States, it's usually about 4 to 5 feet away. You know exactly where it is. But get into their personal space and look at their eyes. Make that eye contact. Number 11 is use controls. And your voice has 3 sort of what we call control knobs. And one is volume, another is speed, and another is tone. And you can use all 3 of these by turning up the volume for emphasis on certain points that you want to make, and then you make me speak a little bit more softly in other parts, and to make more subtle points. Notice how I slowed down my rate of speech there. I not only changed volume, but I also changed speed and to a certain degree tone. Use all 3 of those controls in order to effectively relay your message for maximum impact. And number 12 is, and this is kind of obvious and last here, is to practice. Memorize the details of a story and relate them off the cuff. What I would do is, whenever I would always know that the first 2 minutes when I get up in front of the audience is my weakest time. So I would memorize all my main points and rehearse that part probably 2 or 3 times more than the rest of the entire presentation, because once I nailed that, I kind of got into a flow. And oftentimes I would write down sort of key words that I wanted to touch on, either on the podium or maybe in a small note card, something like that. Not reading off it, but just looking at it as a reminder so I didn't get off course in those crucial first few minutes. So it goes without saying that if you're going to do a long speech, practice it over and over and over again. As Winston Churchill used to say, if your speech is 10 minutes long, you should practice 10 times that, for at least 10 times 10 minutes, or at least 100 minutes of practice. And that's a good gauge in which to use in order to make sure that you'll knock it out of the park when it comes time to do a speech and create a motivational speech for your salespeople. And like I said before, this is very effective not only just in group speeches, but also in one-on-one conversations that you have with your reps as well. And this is particularly effective in all motivational profiles. And as we had talked about in previous shows here in the Sales Management Mastery Academy, for our paid members, we have what we call our motivational questionnaire, where you can figure out what profile out of the 5 profiles each of your salespeople has. And it's very effective, and we teach you exactly how to do that so you can motivate them individually. But speeches and storytelling goes across all profiles. So this is one universal motivational tactic that you can use not only on a daily basis, but also for in front of your sales group or maybe in front of your region, in front of your company, in order to really make maximum impact in your speeches as well as your interactions with your salespeople. So just to summarize our 12 tips here on how to motivate your salespeople through stories is: number 1, to be natural. Number 2, keep it lean. Number 3, know what you're trying to accomplish. Number 4, tie the story to the point that's being made. Number 5, don't overdo it. Number 6, balance failures with success. Number 7, don't fabricate. And number 8, don't be obvious. Number 9, collect your material in a swipe file. Number 10, maintain good eye contact. Number 11, use your controls of volume, speed, and tone. And lastly, number 12 is practice, practice, practice. Now, if you or your company is seriously interested in learning how to motivate your sales team, get more sales, and lead your sales team to sales superstardom, contact us directly at info@salesmanagementmastery.com for more information on our live sales manager training seminars and workshops. Once again, that's info@salesmanagementmastery.com for more information on our live training seminars and workshops for sales managers. That's it for this week's episode of Sales Management Mastery. Until next time, wishing you ultimate sales management success.
You've been listening to the sales management, motivational, and leadership training expert, Ralph Burns. Ralph invites you to discover the sales manager training secrets that will unleash a flood of new sales from your sales team. Visit salestraininggift.com and you'll get instant access to your choice of life-changing sales manager training techniques, only taught in the internationally acclaimed Sales Management Mastery Academy online community. Go now to salestraininggift.com. Sales Management Mastery.